A desperate mother tries to save her baby in distress, but her strength is not enough. At the most critical moment, something unexpected happens. John Wallace stood at his office window in downtown New York, watching the endless stream of yellow cabs crawling through the congested streets below. As a market analyst at one of the city's most prestigious consulting firms, he had achieved everything society deemed successful. Yet the emptiness inside him grew deeper with each passing day. The relentless pace of corporate life, the constant demands and the suffocating rhythm of the city had finally pushed him to his breaking point. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching us from. Let's keep going. That morning, he made the decision that would transform his life forever. After 15 years of building his career, John walked into his supervisor's office and resigned from his position. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as he sold his Brooklyn apartment and systematically dismantled the life he had built in the concrete jungle. His destination was a small cabin on the outskirts of Yellowstone National Park. The property, nestled among towering pines and surrounded by pristine wilderness, promised the deep connection with nature he had been yearning for. It was as far from the corporate world as he could get, both physically and spiritually. The first few months in his new home felt like a rebirth. John spent his days exploring unknown trails, each step taking him deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The rhythm of his life shifted from meeting deadlines to observing the natural cycles around him. He began keeping a detailed journal, documenting everything from the morning mist rising over the valleys to the haunting calls of wolves in the distance. The crystal-clear streams that meandered through his property became his morning companions, their gentle burbling replacing the harsh honking of New York traffic. Majestic trees, some older than the nation itself, stood as silent sentinels around his cabin. He learned to identify different bird calls, track animal movements, and read the subtle changes in weather patterns that swept across the landscape. But as spring began to unfold its verdant canvas across the park, John started noticing things that seemed out of place in this natural paradise. During his daily explorations, he stumbled upon old rusted traps hidden among the underbrush. At night, strange sounds echoed through the darkness, sounds that didn't match the familiar patterns of nocturnal wildlife he had come to know. These discoveries stirred something inside him, awakening the analytical mind he had honed during his years in consulting. Each unusual finding was carefully noted in his journal, forming a pattern that suggested he wasn't as alone in this wilderness as he had initially thought. The peace he had found in his isolation began to feel precarious, tainted by signs that something was amiss in his newfound paradise. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, a particularly unsettling sound carried across the darkening forest. It wasn't the natural chorus of the wilderness he had grown accustomed to. This was different, mechanical, man-made. In that moment, John realized that his escape from the complexities of urban life might have led him to something far more challenging than corporate boardrooms and market analyses. Looking out at the deepening shadows among the trees, he couldn't shake the feeling that his decision to move to Yellowstone would test him in ways he never imagined. The wilderness he had sought for peace and solitude held secrets that would soon draw him into an unexpected journey, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the natural world he had come to love. Little did he know that the next morning would bring an encounter that would shatter the tranquility of his new life and set him on a path that would demand every skill he had developed in his former life, along with courage he never knew he possessed. The analytical precision that had served him so well in New York was about to be put to use in a very different kind of investigation, one where the stakes went far beyond market shares and profit margins. As night settled over his cabin, John made one final entry in his journal, documenting the strange sounds and his growing unease. The wilderness around him held its breath, as if waiting for the dawn that would change everything. The peaceful chapter of his new life was about to give way to something far more challenging, though he still couldn't imagine just how much his life was about to change. The spring morning dawned crisp and clear over Yellowstone, the kind of morning that had become John's favorite since leaving New York behind. The sun was just beginning to paint the mountains in shades of gold when he set out on one of his daily explorations, his journal tucked securely in his backpack. The trail he chose that morning was one of the more remote paths he had discovered, winding through dense forest and pristine wilderness. As he walked deeper into the forest, the peaceful morning atmosphere was suddenly shattered by a sound that made his blood run cold. A sharp, piercing cry cut through the air, a sound of pure distress that seemed to combine both pain and desperation. John froze in his tracks, his heart pounding as he tried to pinpoint the direction of the sound. Following the desperate cries, he pushed through the underbrush until he emerged into a small clearing. The scene before him made his heart clench. A mother dog lay trapped in an iron snare, her movements desperate and pained as she struggled not just for herself, but reached repeatedly towards something at the edge of the clearing. Following her frantic gaze, John spotted the reason for her increased distress. A small puppy was struggling in a muddy pool, slowly sinking into the thick mire. Time seemed to compress as John assessed the situation. The mother dog's predicament was severe. The trap that held her was sturdy and well anchored, but the puppy's situation was even more urgent as it fought against the sucking mud that threatened to pull it under. The mother's cries grew more desperate as she watched her baby struggle, unable to help. Without hesitation, John searched the area for anything he could use. Finding a long branch, he carefully extended it toward the puppy, trying to create a lifeline for the struggling animal. The mud made the rescue attempt challenging, but John refused to give up. With careful maneuvering, he managed to help the small creature gain enough purchase to pull itself free of the mud's grasp. Once the puppy was safe, John turned his attention to the mother dog. The trap was unlike anything he'd seen before, professional grade and definitely not something a casual hunter would use. As he examined the mechanism, trying to find a way to release it without causing further harm, the sound of voices and approaching footsteps caught his attention. Acting on instinct, John quickly moved behind a large tree, keeping both the trapped dog and her puppy in his line of sight. Two men emerged from the forest, carrying backpacks and equipment. Their conversation, though quiet, carried clearly in the still morning air. They discussed their merchandise and mentioned a company name that John carefully committed to memory: Harrison Export Co. The casual way they talked about their activities sent a chill down John's spine. This wasn't some isolated incident. Their words painted a picture of a well-organized operation. They mentioned drop points, schedules, and other locations throughout the park where they had set up similar traps. John knew he had to act. Waiting for the right moment, he created a diversion by tossing a stone far into the brush. When the men moved to investigate the sound, he quickly worked to free the mother dog from the trap. The mechanism was complex, but his hands, steady from years of precise work in his former life, didn't falter. As soon as she was free, the mother dog showed remarkable intelligence. Despite her injury, she managed to guide her puppy away from danger, while her presence helped keep the men at bay. John used the opportunity to retreat strategically, his mind already racing with the implications of what he had witnessed. Making his way back to his cabin, John's analytical mind began processing everything he had seen and heard. The professional grade of the trap, the organized nature of the operation, the mention of Harrison Export Co. All of it pointed to something much larger and more sinister than random hunting incidents. That evening, as he sat at his cabin table, making detailed notes about everything he had witnessed, John realized that his life was about to change dramatically once again. The peace he had sought in Yellowstone had led him to something that would require every skill he had developed in his corporate life, along with courage he never knew he possessed. He couldn't simply walk away from what he had discovered. The wilderness he had come to love and its inhabitants needed someone to stand up for them. As darkness fell over the forest, John began to formulate a plan. He would need help, resources, and most importantly, evidence. The skills that had made him a successful market analyst, attention to detail, pattern recognition, strategic thinking, would now be put to use in a very different kind of investigation. Tomorrow he would begin gathering information, but he knew he would have to be careful. The men he had encountered were clearly part of something bigger, and his next steps would need to be calculated and precise. The morning after his encounter in the forest, John made his way to the conservation office in Gardner, Montana. The small building, with its weathered wooden sign and row of official vehicles parked outside, represented his best hope for addressing what he had witnessed. As he pushed open the heavy door, the smell of coffee and old paperwork greeted him. Inside, John found himself facing a tired-looking official who listened to his account with an expression that shifted from mild interest to resigned indifference. As John described the trap, the men he had encountered, and the mention of Harrison Export Co., the official's response was far from what he had hoped for. "Look, Mr. Wallace," the man said, shuffling some papers on his desk, "we understand your concern, but our hands are tied. We're operating on a limited budget, and investigating these claims requires resources we simply don't have. Besides, without concrete evidence, there's not much we can do." The bureaucratic dismissal felt like a punch to the gut. John had hoped his detailed account, combined with the specific information about Harrison Export Co., would spark some kind of official action. Instead, he was handed a stack of forms to fill out and told they would look into it when resources permitted. Walking back to his cabin, John's frustration gradually transformed into determination. The analytical skills that had made him successful in New York began to kick in, and he started breaking down the problem like he would have approached a complex market analysis project. Over the next few weeks, John developed a systematic approach to gathering information. He began mapping locations where he found traps, carefully documenting each discovery in his journal with precise coordinates and photographs. He created detailed spreadsheets, tracking patterns in trap placements and timing of suspicious activities. His morning hikes took on a new purpose. Each exploration became a careful reconnaissance mission, where he would note signs of recent activity, unusual tracks, and any equipment left behind. He began to notice patterns. Certain trails were more frequently used than others, and activity seemed to increase during specific phases of the moon. During his investigations, John also started making discreet inquiries in town. He would sit at the local diner, carefully listening to conversations around him. He visited the general store, striking up casual conversations with locals who might have noticed unusual activities in the area. Some people seemed to know more than they were willing to say, their eyes darting nervously away when certain topics came up. The more he discovered, the more complex the situation appeared. The Harrison Export Co., which maintained a legitimate-looking business front in town, seemed to have connections throughout the local community. Some residents appeared to benefit from looking the other way, while others seemed genuinely afraid to speak up. One afternoon, while reviewing his notes at the local library, John overheard a conversation that caught his attention. Two women were discussing recent changes in wildlife patterns, and one mentioned a journalist who had been asking similar questions. The name Sarah Matthews came up, along with mentions of her previous work exposing environmental violations in other parts of the country. Later that same day, at the town's coffee shop, John encountered an older man who kept giving him knowing looks. The man eventually introduced himself as Charlie Miller, and though he seemed reluctant to say much in public, his comments about his former work as a forest ranger hinted at deeper knowledge of the situation. As John drove back to his cabin that evening, his mind was racing with possibilities. He had spent his career analyzing data and connecting dots to reveal larger patterns. Now those same skills were showing him the outline of something much bigger than isolated incidents of illegal hunting. The Harrison Export Co., the patterns of trap placement, the community's reluctance to speak openly. It all pointed to an organized operation that had embedded itself deeply in the local ecosystem. In his journal that night, John began sketching out a new approach. He needed allies, people with different skills and resources who could help expose what was happening. Sarah Matthews, with her investigative journalism background, and Charlie Miller, with his insider knowledge of the Park Service, could be exactly the partners he needed. The wilderness around his cabin seemed different now. What had initially been a retreat from the complexities of his corporate life had become the front line of a different kind of challenge. The peaceful sounds of the forest at night were now punctuated by his racing thoughts as he planned his next moves. As he prepared for bed, John realized that his decision to leave New York had led him to something far more meaningful than he could have imagined. The skills he had developed, analyzing market trends and corporate strategies, were about to be repurposed for a cause that really mattered: protecting the wilderness and its inhabitants from those who would exploit them for profit. The Gardner coffee shop had become John's unofficial headquarters for gathering information. Its worn wooden tables and constant buzz of local conversation provided the perfect cover for his growing investigation. It was here that he finally made his first real breakthrough in the form of Sarah Matthews, who was nursing a large cup of coffee while typing furiously on her laptop. John recognized her from the newspaper bylines he'd been researching. Her articles on environmental issues had won several awards for investigative journalism. She looked up as he approached her table, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of his appearance with professional assessment. "Ms. Matthews," John said, keeping his voice low, "I've been hoping to meet you. I'm John Wallace, and I believe we're investigating the same situation." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mr. Wallace, the former New York analyst who moved to a cabin in the woods. Yes, I've heard about you. People talk about the city slicker, who's been asking too many questions." As John shared his discoveries about the Harrison export concern and the elaborate network of traps he'd documented, Sarah's professional detachment gave way to intense interest. She pulled out a notebook, her pen moving rapidly across the pages as he spoke. "This confirms several patterns I've been tracking," she said, turning her laptop to show him a series of articles about similar operations in other national parks. "But here's the challenge. These people are careful. They maintain legitimate business fronts, and the local community is either involved or too afraid to speak up." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlie Miller, the former forest ranger John had met earlier. The older man pulled up a chair without invitation, his weathered face serious. "I couldn't help overhearing," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if you're going after who I think you are, you need to know what you're up against. I spent 20 years as a ranger here, until I reported the wrong things to the wrong people." Over the next hour, Charlie revealed how he had discovered evidence of cooperation between certain park employees and local business interests. His attempts to report these connections had led to his early retirement, a polite way of saying he had been pushed out. Sarah's investigative instincts were fully engaged now. "We need to approach this systematically," she said, opening a fresh document on her laptop. John's background in analysis, my investigative skills, and Charlie's knowledge of the Park Service, together we might have a chance of exposing this operation. They spent the afternoon developing a strategy. John's detailed maps and documentation would provide the foundation. Sarah's journalistic expertise would help build a compelling narrative that couldn't be ignored. Charlie's intimate knowledge of park operations and local dynamics would help them navigate the complex web of relationships they were up against. "The key," John explained, pulling out his meticulously maintained spreadsheets, "is connecting the Harrison export commodores to these activities. Everything I've documented points to them as the central hub, but we need irrefutable evidence." Charlie nodded grimly. "They've been operating here for years, always just under the radar. They have friends in high places and eyes everywhere. The regular shipments going out in their trucks, the seasonal patterns of their activities. It's all carefully orchestrated." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she compiled their collective knowledge. "We need to focus on the paper trail," she said. "Every operation, no matter how careful, leaves traces. Financial records, shipping manifests, employee schedules. There are always patterns if you know where to look." As the afternoon light began to fade, the three unlikely allies had formed a solid plan. John would continue his systematic documentation of trap locations and activities in the park. Sarah would dig into the business connections and financial aspects of Harrison Export Co. Charlie would reach out to his old contacts within the Park Service, looking for others who might have noticed suspicious patterns. Looking at his new partners, John felt a surge of hope. In New York, he had learned that the most complex problems required diverse expertise to solve. Here in the wilderness, that same principle held true. Each of them brought unique skills and perspectives to the challenge ahead. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Sarah looked at both men seriously. "This won't be easy," she warned. "These people have spent years building their operation. They won't give it up without a fight." Charlie's weathered face broke into a determined smile. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But they've never faced anything like us before. Sometimes the right people just need to come together at the right time." Walking back to his cabin in the gathering dusk, John reflected on how his life had changed. He had come to Yellowstone seeking peace and solitude, but instead had found a purpose and allies in an unexpected mission. The wilderness around him now held both beauty and challenge, and he was ready to fight for its protection. The investigation began to take shape in John's cabin, which had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins showing trap locations and suspicious activity patterns. Sarah's research was spread across the dining table, while Charlie's notes about park operations filled a dedicated corner. "Look at this pattern," John said, tracing a line across one of his maps. "The trap locations form a network around these specific trails. They're not random, they're strategically placed to funnel wildlife through certain areas." His analyst's mind had quickly identified the systematic nature of the operation. Sarah was immersed in a stack of business records she had obtained through her journalistic connections. "The Harrison Export Commerce has an interesting business model," she explained, spreading out several documents. "Their official records show they deal in local artisanal products, but their shipping volumes don't match the visible inventory in their warehouse." Charlie stood by the window, his experience allowing him to read the forest in ways the others couldn't. "Those shipping schedules you found, Sarah, they align perfectly with the seasonal movement patterns of local wildlife. They're timing their operations to maximize their catches." The team's complementary skills were proving invaluable. John's analytical approach had revealed patterns that might have gone unnoticed. Sarah's investigative experience helped them follow the money trail, while Charlie's knowledge of park operations provided crucial context for their discoveries. During their daily reconnaissance, they began documenting more than just trap locations. They noted unusual vehicle movements, particularly around the Harrison Export Commerce warehouse during early morning hours. Sarah photographed license plates and tracked vehicle patterns, building a database of suspicious activities. One breakthrough came when they discovered a hidden loading area behind the Harrison warehouse. "They're using this secondary entrance to move goods without being seen from the main road," John observed, his corporate experience helping him recognize the sophisticated logistics involved. The local community's reaction to their investigation varied. Some residents, seeing John with Sarah and Charlie, began sharing their own observations in hushed conversations. Others grew notably distant, avoiding eye contact or quickly changing direction when they saw the trio approaching. "People are scared," Charlie explained one evening as they reviewed their findings, "but they're also tired of looking the other way. We just need to show them there's hope for change." Sarah's journalistic instincts were proving invaluable. She had begun building relationships with some of the younger employees at Harrison Export Co., carefully gathering information about internal operations. "The company maintains a legitimate front," she explained, "but there's a separate operation running parallel to the official business. Their investigation revealed sophisticated equipment being used by the hunters, high-tech gear that seemed out of place for a small-town operation." "This isn't amateur hour," John noted, examining photographs of some of the devices they documented. "This is professional-grade equipment, probably worth thousands of dollars." The team worked methodically, building their case piece by piece. John applied the same attention to detail that had served him well in market analysis, creating detailed reports of everything they discovered. Sarah focused on developing sources and documenting testimonies, while Charlie provided crucial insights into park operations and potential weak points in the company's activities. As their evidence mounted, they began to see the full scope of the operation. The Harrison Export Commerce had created a sophisticated network that extended throughout the region. Their legitimate business served as a perfect cover for their real activities, and their connections in the community had helped keep their operations hidden. "We need to be strategic about how we use this information," Sarah advised during one of their evening planning sessions. "We're not just fighting a company, we're up against an entire system that's been in place for years." Charlie nodded in agreement. "It's not enough to just expose them. We need to make sure the evidence is strong enough that they can't simply brush it aside." As the sun set over Yellowstone, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, the three investigators reviewed their progress. They had uncovered more than they initially expected, but they knew there was still much work to be done. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, revealing a picture of environmental exploitation that had gone unchecked for too long. John looked at his unlikely partners, feeling a deep sense of purpose, His decision to leave New York had led him to something far more meaningful than corporate success. Here in the wilderness he had come to love, he was part of a team fighting to protect something truly valuable. The transformation began quietly at first, like the subtle shift of seasons in Yellowstone. Local farmers, who had long kept their silence, started offering their barns as safe havens for injured wildlife found near the traps. The owner of the local veterinary clinic began treating wounded animals without asking questions, documenting injuries that would later serve as evidence. John watched in amazement as the community's conscience slowly awakened. At the Gardener coffee shop, conversations that once stopped when he entered now continued, with people making deliberate eye contact and sharing information. The wall of silence that had protected Harrison export farms was beginning to crumble. "It's remarkable," Sarah commented one morning as she watched a group of local teens organizing a weekend wilderness watch program. "These kids have grown up seeing these practices as normal, but now they're questioning everything." The youth movement proved particularly powerful. High school students, armed with their phones and social media skills, began documenting and sharing evidence of environmental damage in the area. They organized nature walks and educational sessions about local wildlife, drawing attention to the importance of preservation. Charlie's presence had also begun to make a difference. His long history in the community lent credibility to their cause. "People remember when things were different," he explained to John and Sarah. "They remember when the park was truly protected, before money started talking louder than conscience." Local business owners, inspired by the growing movement, started taking subtle but significant stands. The general store stopped carrying Harrison Export Company products. The diner began hosting community meetings, disguised as dinner specials, where residents could safely share information about suspicious activities they'd witnessed. One of the most surprising allies emerged in Tom Henderson, owner of the local hardware store. He approached John one afternoon with valuable information. "Been keeping track of their equipment purchases," he whispered, sliding over a notebook filled with dates and items. "Lot of specialized gear that doesn't match their supposed business." The farmers' market became an unexpected hub of resistance. Under the guise of selling local produce, community members exchanged information and coordinated their efforts to protect the wildlife. Some offered their properties as surveillance points, while others volunteered to help document suspicious activities. Sarah's journalistic background helped organize these scattered efforts into a coherent movement. She taught community members how to properly document evidence, maintain careful records, and protect themselves while gathering information. "Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, helps complete the puzzle," she explained during an informal workshop at the library. The local school board, influenced by passionate students and concerned parents, began incorporating environmental education into their curriculum. They invited Charlie to speak about his experiences as a former ranger, helping young people understand the importance of protecting their natural heritage. John's analytical skills found new purpose in coordinating these various community initiatives. He created secure channels for sharing information, developed protocols for documenting evidence, and helped establish a network of communication that kept everyone connected while maintaining their safety. The owner of the local animal shelter, inspired by the movement, began offering her facility as a rehabilitation center for injured wildlife. She worked closely with sympathetic veterinarians to provide care for animals that had been rescued from traps, keeping detailed records of their injuries and recovery. Even some former Harrison Export Company's employees, moved by the community's unity, began sharing information. They spoke of irregular shipping schedules, unofficial payment systems, and suspicious late-night activities at the warehouse. Each piece of information added to the growing body of evidence against the company. Local artists joined the cause, creating powerful works that depicted the beauty of Yellowstone's wildlife and the importance of preservation. Their exhibitions drew visitors from neighboring towns, spreading awareness beyond Gardener's borders and attracting attention to their cause. The change in community attitude was perhaps best symbolized by the transformation of the town's monthly council meetings. Once sparsely attended formalities, they now drew crowds of engaged citizens, demanding accountability and stricter enforcement of environmental protections. As John sat on his cabin porch one evening, reviewing the day's developments with Sarah and Charlie, He marveled at how far they'd come. What had begun as his solitary stand against environmental exploitation had blossomed into a community-wide movement for change. "This is more than just an investigation now," Sarah observed, reviewing her latest notes. "It's become a revival of community values, a rediscovery of what makes this place special." Charlie nodded in agreement. "People are remembering who they really are," he said quietly. "They're choosing to stand for something bigger than themselves." The sun set over Yellowstone, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The wilderness that had drawn John away from his corporate life in New York had become more than just his personal sanctuary. It had become a symbol of a community's awakening conscience, a testament to the power of people united in protection of something precious. Sarah's strategic placement of initial news stories began rippling through media channels across the country. What started as small articles in local papers about environmental concerns in Yellowstone grew into larger features examining the role of businesses in wildlife preservation. The Harrison Export Co., once operating comfortably in the shadows, found itself increasingly under public scrutiny. "The timing is perfect," Sarah explained during a strategy meeting in John's cabin. "Environmental consciousness is at an all-time high, and people are particularly sensitive to stories about wildlife protection." Her years of experience in investigative journalism had taught her exactly how to build a compelling narrative that would capture public attention. The evidence they had gathered began appearing in carefully crafted news stories. Local television stations picked up the coverage, broadcasting images of the pristine Yellowstone wilderness, alongside reports about suspicious business activities. The contrast between the natural beauty and its exploitation struck a chord with viewers. John's meticulous documentation proved invaluable as media interest grew. His spreadsheets, photographs, and detailed analyses provided journalists with concrete evidence they could verify independently. The market analysts' precision in recording every detail left no room for doubt about the patterns they had uncovered. The local community's involvement added human interest to the story. Young environmental activists spoke passionately on camera about their commitment to protecting their heritage. Farmers shared their experiences of finding injured wildlife on their properties. Former employees of Harrison Export Co. began speaking out, though some still preferred to remain anonymous. Charlie's background as a former ranger lent crucial credibility to their cause. His interviews, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades protecting the park, resonated with audiences. "This isn't just about business practices," he would explain. "It's about preserving something irreplaceable for future generations." As national media outlets began picking up the story, the pressure on Harrison Export Co. intensified. Their carefully maintained business facade began showing cracks. Suppliers started asking questions about their operations. Partners began distancing themselves from the company. The phone at their office rang constantly with inquiries from reporters. Local government officials, who had long turned a blind eye to suspicious activities, found themselves facing uncomfortable questions from constituents and journalists alike. The community's awakened conscience demanded answers about years of regulatory oversight. John watched as the movement they had started transformed into something larger than himself. His decision to leave New York had led him not just to a simpler life, but to a cause that was now capturing national attention. The skills he had honed in corporate America were helping expose practices that threatened the wilderness he had grown to love. The increased publicity brought new allies to their cause. Environmental organizations offered support and resources. Legal experts reached out, offering to help build cases against those responsible. Wildlife protection groups provided additional documentation of similar patterns in other areas. Sarah worked tirelessly to keep the story in the public eye, releasing new information at strategic intervals. Each revelation built upon the last, creating a comprehensive picture of environmental exploitation that became impossible to ignore. Her articles began winning awards, bringing even more attention to their cause. The Harrison Export Co.'s attempts to dismiss the allegations as misunderstandings or coincidences began to fall flat in the face of mounting evidence. Their carefully constructed facade of legitimacy was crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny and irrefutable documentation. As evening fell over Yellowstone, John sat with Sarah and Charlie, watching the national news coverage of their story. The wilderness outside his window remained as beautiful as ever, but now it represented something more, a symbol of what people could achieve when they united to protect what they valued. "We've started something significant," Sarah observed, reviewing the latest media coverage on her laptop. "The spotlight is finally shining where it needs to." Charlie nodded, his weathered face showing satisfaction. "People are finally seeing what we've been seeing all along. Sometimes you just need to show them the truth." The growing attention brought new challenges and responsibilities, but also hope. The wilderness that had called to John, offering escape from his corporate life, had become the centerpiece of a story that was capturing the nation's conscience. The quiet sanctuary he had sought had transformed into the front line of a much larger battle for environmental protection. The first signs of pushback came subtly. John noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked near his cabin, their occupants watching his comings and goings. His daily walks in the wilderness were now accompanied by the distinct feeling of being observed. The peaceful sanctuary he had created was becoming a place of unease. Sarah's experiences were more direct. Her regular sources began to withdraw, citing unexpected pressures. Anonymous messages appeared in her inbox, suggesting she reconsider her investigation. At the local coffee shop, conversations would stop when she entered, replaced by pointed stares and whispered warnings. "They're trying to isolate us," Sarah explained during an emergency meeting at Charlie's house. "It's a classic intimidation tactic. Make us feel alone, make our supporters too nervous to help." Her years of investigative journalism had prepared her for such reactions, but the personal nature of the pressure was testing her resolve. Charlie discovered his home had been entered while he was away. Nothing was taken, but his files had been clearly disturbed, papers shifted just enough to send a message. His years of experience in law enforcement helped him recognize the calculated nature of these actions. The Harrison Export Cohen's response became more visible as well. They launched a public relations campaign, portraying themselves as victims of baseless accusations. Local papers suddenly featured advertisements touting their contributions to the community's economy. Anonymous letters to the editor questioned the motives of outsiders trying to disrupt local businesses. Even John's allies in the community faced pressure. The farmers who had offered shelter for injured wildlife found their supply deliveries mysteriously delayed. The veterinary clinic that had helped document injuries began receiving anonymous complaints about their practices. But the intimidation attempts had an unexpected effect. They strengthened the resolve of those committed to the cause. The local teens who had been documenting environmental damage doubled their efforts, now working in groups for safety. Community members began organizing neighborhood watch programs, creating a network of vigilant observers. The local hardware store owner, Tom Henderson, demonstrated particular courage. Despite pressure from suppliers connected to Harrison Export Co., he continued providing crucial information about equipment purchases. "My grandfather built this store on honest principles," he told John. "I'm not about to abandon those principles now." Sarah's journalistic instincts turned these intimidation attempts into additional evidence. She meticulously documented each incident, building a pattern that revealed the desperate measures being employed to maintain control. Her articles began highlighting how pressure tactics typically indicated guilt rather than innocence. John applied his analytical skills to understanding the psychology behind their opponents' actions. "They're following a predictable pattern," he explained to his allies. "Every aggressive move reveals something about their vulnerabilities." His corporate experience helped him recognize the signs of an organization feeling threatened. Charlie's extensive network of former colleagues proved invaluable during this period. They provided additional security measures and helped monitor suspicious activities around key locations. His knowledge of law enforcement procedures helped the team stay within legal boundaries while protecting themselves. The community's response to these intimidation attempts was powerful. Local business owners who had been hesitant to take sides began openly supporting the investigation. The farmers' market transformed into a hub of resistance, with vendors openly sharing information about suspicious activities they witnessed. One evening, as John returned to his cabin, he found a group of local residents waiting for him. They had organized a volunteer security patrol, ensuring that those who stood up for the wilderness wouldn't stand alone. The sight of his neighbors taking such initiative moved him deeply. "They're fighting back the only way they know how," Sarah observed, watching the growing community response. "But they're forgetting something crucial. Truth becomes stronger under pressure." Charlie's expression was determined as he reviewed their latest findings. "Every attempt to silence us just proves we're on the right track. They wouldn't fight so hard if we weren't close to something important." As darkness settled over Yellowstone, John stood on his porch, looking out at the wilderness he had chosen to protect. The pressure they faced was real, but so was their determination. The peaceful life he had sought in leaving New York had evolved into something far more meaningful, a stand for principles that transcended personal comfort. The transformation of Gardner's community spirit became most evident during an impromptu gathering at the local community center. What started as a small meeting to discuss recent events had grown into a full town assembly. The usually quiet hall was filled with voices of residents ready to take a stand for their beloved wilderness. Local business owners, who had initially remained neutral, now stepped forward with crucial information. The owner of the local gas station shared security camera footage showing suspicious late-night activities around Harrison Export Co.'s trucks. The manager of the building supply store produced records of unusual equipment purchases that didn't match any legitimate business needs. "We've been quiet for too long," declared Martha Stevens, the elderly owner of the town's oldest bookstore. "This is our home, our wilderness, and it's time we protected it." Her words sparked a wave of similar declarations from other longtime residents who had witnessed the gradual changes in their community. The younger generation took the lead in organizing new initiatives. High school students created a digital platform to safely share information about suspicious activities. College students home on break offered their technical skills to help document and organize evidence. Local artists designed posters promoting wildlife protection that began appearing in shop windows throughout town. Sarah worked closely with these young activists, teaching them responsible journalism practices and the importance of verified information. "Your enthusiasm is powerful," she told them, "but it needs to be channeled through careful documentation and fact-checking." John's analytical expertise found new purpose in coordinating these community efforts. He developed systems to verify and catalog information from multiple sources, ensuring that every piece of evidence they gathered would stand up to scrutiny. His corporate background proved invaluable in organizing the growing movement efficiently. Charlie's presence provided a sense of security and legitimacy to their efforts. His years of experience helped guide the community in legal and effective ways to protect their environment. Under his guidance, resident patrols began monitoring wildlife areas, always careful to stay within legal boundaries while documenting suspicious activities. The local Farmers Alliance, led by Bob Wilson, whose family had worked the land for generations, organized a network of safe havens for injured wildlife. They developed a subtle system of communication, using traditional farm symbols to indicate safe zones and potential threats. Even the local church became involved, with Reverend Thompson incorporating messages about environmental stewardship into his sermons. The church basement became a meeting place for community organizing, its activities protected under the guise of regular prayer meetings. The town's small veterinary clinic expanded its services, with Dr. Rebecca Chen offering free care for injured wildlife. Local families volunteered to help rehabilitate animals, turning their barns and garages into temporary shelters. The network of care grew stronger with each passing day. John watched in amazement as the community's response continued to evolve. His decision to leave New York's corporate world had led him to witness something remarkable: the awakening of a community's collective conscience and its determination to protect what mattered most. Mary Anderson, owner of the local diner, transformed her establishment into an unofficial headquarters for their cause. Her regular customers became a network of eyes and ears, sharing information over coffee and pie. The diner's bulletin board, once filled with local ads, now displayed wildlife protection information and community meeting announcements. The local teachers began incorporating environmental education into their lessons, helping students understand the importance of preserving their natural heritage. Field trips into Yellowstone took on new meaning as students learned to recognize and document signs of environmental impact. As evening approached, John sat with Sarah and Charlie at their usual table in the coffee shop, reviewing the day's developments. The atmosphere had changed dramatically from their early days of investigation. Where once there had been whispers and averted eyes, now there was open discussion and determined planning. "Look at what's happening," Sarah remarked, gesturing to the packed coffee shop where people were openly sharing information and organizing new initiatives. "They tried to silence us, but instead they've awakened something much more powerful." Charlie nodded in agreement, his weathered face showing satisfaction. "This is what real community looks like, people standing together for something bigger than themselves." The wilderness outside seemed to respond to this growing unity, its presence more vital and immediate than ever. The cause that had brought John to leave his corporate life had evolved into something far greater, a movement that was transforming not just the landscape, but the very heart of the community that called it home. In John's cabin, now serving as their strategic headquarters, the team gathered to plan their most ambitious move yet. Sarah's laptop displayed the culmination of their investigation, a comprehensive digital dossier documenting every aspect of Harrison Export Co.'s activities. John's analytical maps covered one wall, showing clear patterns of the company's operations, while Charlie's inside knowledge had helped them identify key vulnerabilities. "We need to make this exposure undeniable," Sarah explained, reviewing their collected evidence. "The broadcast has to be so compelling that no one can look away." Her years of investigative journalism had taught her the importance of timing and presentation in breaking significant stories. John applied his corporate experience to organizing their evidence. "Each piece needs to connect clearly to the next," he explained, arranging documents in precise order. "We're telling a story that starts with individual incidents and reveals a systematic operation." His background in market analysis helped him create a clear narrative from complex data. The local tech-savvy youth had helped set up a sophisticated communication network. Using encrypted channels and secure platforms, they could coordinate their final moves without risk of interception. Their technological expertise had become crucial to the operation's success. Charlie's contribution was equally vital. His knowledge of park operations helped them identify the perfect locations for Sarah's planned broadcast. "We need to show not just the evidence, but the actual impact on the wilderness," he explained, marking specific points on their maps. The community's support had grown stronger with each passing day. Local business owners provided alibis for meetings, storing equipment in their back rooms, and offering their premises as safe meeting spaces. The town's network of supporters had become an invisible but powerful force. "The key is the timing," Sarah emphasized during one strategy session. "We need to coordinate every element perfectly." She had planned a live broadcast that would expose the operation while evidence was being gathered, making it impossible for anyone to deny what was happening. John's methodical mind proved invaluable in planning the logistics. Each participant had specific roles and backup plans, ensuring that nothing could derail their exposure of the truth. His experience in managing complex projects helped them anticipate and prepare for various scenarios. The veterinary clinic prepared extensive documentation of wildlife injuries, creating a compelling record of the operation's impact. Dr. Chen's detailed medical reports provided scientific evidence that would be crucial to their broadcast. Local farmers positioned themselves as lookouts, using their legitimate presence on the land to monitor key areas. Their knowledge of the terrain and daily routines in the area helped the team plan their movements with precision. The younger members of the community had their roles too. Their social media expertise would ensure the story spread rapidly once it broke, making it impossible to suppress. They prepared platforms and channels to share information as it unfolded. Sarah spent hours preparing her broadcast script, ensuring every word was backed by solid evidence. "We're not just exposing wrongdoing," she reminded them. "We're showing how a community can stand up for what's right." The team refined their timing repeatedly. Charlie's experience helped them identify the patterns in Harrison Export Co.'s operations, allowing them to plan their exposure for maximum impact. Every detail was checked and double-checked. As the sun set over Yellowstone, John stood on his cabin porch with Sarah and Charlie, looking out at the wilderness they had fought so hard to protect. The peaceful scene before them strengthened their resolve for what lay ahead. "Everything's in place," Sarah said quietly, reviewing their final checklist. Tomorrow we show everyone what we've discovered. Charlie nodded, his expression determined. The community's ready. Years of silence are about to end. The wilderness seemed to hold its breath as darkness fell. John thought about his journey from New York's corporate towers to this moment. The skills he had honed in business were now serving a greater purpose, protecting the natural world that had given him a new home and purpose. Dawn broke over Yellowstone with a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror the team's focused determination. Sarah's news van, borrowed from her network affiliate, sat ready behind John's cabin, equipped with state-of-the-art broadcasting equipment. Charlie had positioned trusted community members at strategic points throughout the area, each ready to play their part in the day's carefully orchestrated plan. John reviewed their strategy one final time, his analyst's mind checking every detail. The local teenagers' social media network was primed to spread the story the moment Sarah's broadcast began. The farmer's alert system was in place, ready to signal any unusual movement in their designated areas. "Remember," Sarah instructed as she checked her equipment, "we're not just gathering evidence anymore. We're showing the world what's been happening here." Her years of experience in breaking major stories had prepared her for this moment, but even she felt the weight of its importance. The local veterinarian, Dr. Chen, had prepared her facility as a backup location for the broadcast, complete with all the documentation of injured wildlife they had accumulated. The evidence room in her clinic told a compelling story of environmental impact that couldn't be denied. Charlie's network of former Park Service colleagues was strategically positioned throughout the area. Their presence provided both security and credibility to what they were about to reveal. Each person knew their role and the exact timing required for the plan to work. The town's business owners had created a perfect cover of normal activity. The coffee shop was unusually busy, the hardware store had a special sale, and the bookstore hosted a seemingly impromptu reading group. Each location served as a hub for their operation, sheltering supporters and equipment. John's analytical skills found new purpose as he coordinated the timing of each phase. His corporate experience in managing complex projects translated perfectly to orchestrating their carefully planned exposure. Every movement was calculated, every position strategic. Sarah's broadcast equipment was set up at multiple locations, ensuring they would have backup options if needed. The local tech enthusiasts had created a secure communication network, allowing all participants to stay connected without risk of interference. The morning progressed according to plan. Community members casually went about their regular routines while maintaining vigilant observation of key areas. The Harrison Export Comes' warehouse showed signs of typical morning activity, unaware of the scrutiny they were under. "Everything's in position," Charlie reported, his voice calm but determined on their secure channel. The years he had spent protecting the park had led to this moment, and his experience guided their timing perfectly. Local supporters had positioned themselves naturally throughout the area. Mrs. Anderson's diner was fully staffed with volunteers who kept watch while serving coffee. The hardware store's security cameras had been strategically redirected to capture crucial areas. Inside the news van, Sarah prepared for the broadcast that would change everything. Her documentation was organized perfectly, thanks to John's systematic approach. Each piece of evidence was ready to be presented in a compelling narrative that would captivate viewers. John observed the scene from his cabin's porch, noting how the community had transformed into a coordinated team. The skills he had honed in New York's corporate world were serving a greater purpose than he had ever imagined possible. The wilderness itself seemed to sense the importance of the moment. The morning light filtered through the trees, illuminating their operation with an almost ethereal quality. The natural world they sought to protect provided the perfect backdrop for their revelation of truth. "It's time," Sarah announced quietly, checking her watch. The moment they had prepared for was finally at hand. Months of investigation, community organization, and careful planning were about to culminate in a broadcast that would expose everything. Charlie nodded, his weathered face showing quiet determination. "Let's show them what happens when a community stands together." The peaceful morning air carried a sense of anticipation as their plan began to unfold. The wilderness that had called to John, offering escape from his corporate life, was about to become the stage for their greatest challenge yet. Sarah's broadcast began with the pristine wilderness of Yellowstone as her backdrop. Her voice, clear and professional, introduced viewers to the natural beauty of the park before smoothly transitioning to reveal the disturbing reality that threatened it. The live feed captured every detail of their carefully documented evidence. "Behind the scenic beauty of Yellowstone lies a story that demands to be told," Sarah began, her years of investigative experience evident in every word. "For months, we've uncovered a systematic operation that threatens the delicate balance of this protected wilderness." John coordinated the flow of information from his position at the makeshift command center. His laptop displayed real-time updates from their network of observers positioned throughout the area. The analytical skills he'd honed in his corporate career now served to organize their evidence presentation with precision. The local teenagers' social media campaign launched simultaneously with the broadcast. Carefully prepared posts began appearing across multiple platforms, each sharing verified evidence and directing viewers to Sarah's live coverage. The digital wildfire they had planned spread rapidly. Charlie's network reported movement around the Harrison Export Comber warehouse. The company's regular activities had suddenly ceased as awareness of the broadcast spread. Their observers noted unusual activity as employees began reacting to the exposure of their operation. Community members played their roles perfectly. The farmers maintained their regular routines while monitoring key areas. Local business owners kept their establishments running normally, providing cover for the operation while gathering additional evidence. Sarah's broadcast continued, methodically presenting their findings. "These documents," she explained, displaying carefully organized evidence, "show a pattern of systematic exploitation hidden behind legitimate business operations." The camera panned across John's detailed analysis charts, showing clear connections and patterns. Dr. Chen's veterinary records provided compelling scientific evidence. "The impact on local wildlife has been extensively documented," Sarah reported, sharing images of injured animals and medical records that told a powerful story of environmental harm. The local tech team maintained their secure communication network flawlessly, ensuring every participant remained connected and coordinated. Updates flowed smoothly between all points of their operation, allowing them to adapt to each development. Tom Henderson, the hardware store owner, provided crucial testimony about suspicious equipment purchases. His detailed records presented during the broadcast showed patterns that couldn't be explained by legitimate business activities. John's market analysis skills proved invaluable as Sarah presented financial evidence. His charts clearly demonstrated the discrepancies between Harrison Export Co.'s declared business activities and their actual operations. The numbers told a story that couldn't be dismissed. The community's response became part of the story itself. Local residents began gathering in public spaces, watching the broadcast on phones and tablets. Their presence demonstrated the united front they had formed against environmental exploitation. Charlie coordinated with his former colleagues, ensuring that key areas remained under observation. Their professional experience helped maintain the security of the operation while gathering additional evidence as events unfolded. Sarah's broadcast approached its crucial revelation. "The evidence we're about to share," she announced, "demonstrates conclusively how this operation has impacted our protected wilderness." The camera switched to live feeds from multiple locations, showing the full scope of their discovery. The local social media team reported overwhelming response to their campaign. The story had caught fire beyond their local community, drawing national attention to their revelation. Hashtags they had prepared trended rapidly across multiple platforms. John watched the operation unfold from his position, coordinating each element with precise timing. The skills he had developed in New York's financial district now served to expose environmental exploitation rather than generate corporate profits. The wilderness itself seemed to participate in their revelation. The natural beauty of Yellowstone provided a stark contrast to the evidence they presented, reinforcing the importance of protecting this precious environment. As the broadcast continued, the impact of their exposure became evident. Years of hidden activities were being brought into the light, and the power of community action was demonstrated in real time. The impact of Sarah's broadcast rippled through the community like waves on a still pond. The Harrison Export Company's initial response came swiftly as their public relations team scrambled to contain the situation. Press releases flooded local media channels, attempting to dismiss the exposé as misunderstandings and exaggerations. "Look at this," John said, monitoring the company's responses on his laptop. His analyst's eye caught the patterns in their hastily crafted statements, noting the discrepancies between their explanations and the evidence they had presented. Each attempt to justify their activities only served to reinforce the truth of the broadcast's revelations. The company's warehouse had transformed into a hive of unusual activity. Charlie's network reported employees rushing in and out, carrying boxes and documents. "They're trying to hide the evidence," he observed, "but we've already documented everything they're removing." Local residents gathered in the town square, their phones and tablets displaying Sarah's continuing broadcast. The community that had come together to protect their wilderness now stood united, watching as years of hidden activities came to light. The farmers who had provided safe havens for injured wildlife stood proudly among their neighbors. Sarah's professional delivery never wavered as she methodically presented their evidence. "These shipping records," she explained, highlighting documents on screen, "show clear discrepancies between declared exports and actual activities." Her voice carried the weight of irrefutable truth. The local teenagers' social media campaign had exceeded their expectations. Their carefully prepared hashtags trended nationally, drawing attention from major news networks. Environmental organizations began issuing statements of support, amplifying their message beyond their small community. John's detailed financial analysis became a centerpiece of the exposure. His charts and graphs, presented during the broadcast, demonstrated patterns that no amount of corporate spin could explain away. His Wall Street experience had provided the tools to unravel years of deception. The Harrison Export Company's management attempted to maintain an appearance of normal operations, but the cracks in their facade were evident. Suppliers began publicly distancing themselves from the company. Partners issued statements expressing concern and promising internal investigations. Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic became a focal point as media representatives arrived to verify the evidence of environmental impact. Her meticulous records and documentation provided undeniable proof of the operation's effect on local wildlife. The local business community's response surprised even their strongest supporters. Shop owners who had remained neutral now displayed signs supporting the environmental protection movement. The hardware store proudly exhibited Tom Henderson's records of suspicious equipment purchases. Community members continued their roles with remarkable discipline. The farmers maintained their vigilant watch while going about their daily routines. Local coffee shops and diners became impromptu gathering places for residents following the unfolding events. Charlie's years of experience helped them anticipate and counter each of the company's attempts to discredit their evidence. His knowledge of park operations provided context that made their revelations even more compelling. Sarah's broadcast had evolved into continuous coverage as new information emerged. The response we're receiving from across the country shows that this issue resonates far beyond our local community, she reported, sharing messages of support flooding in from viewers nationwide. The local tech team maintained their secure communication network, enabling the team to coordinate their responses to each new development. Their young experts monitored social media reactions, ensuring their message remained clear and focused. John watched from his cabin as the story they had carefully constructed unfolded exactly as planned. The analytical precision he had developed in his corporate career had helped create an airtight case that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. As evening approached, the impact of their exposure continued to grow. The wilderness that had drawn John away from his life in New York had become the centerpiece of a national conversation about environmental protection and corporate responsibility. "We've started something significant," Sarah observed during a brief break in her coverage. "The truth has a power all its own once it's revealed." Charlie nodded in agreement, his weathered face showing satisfaction. "This is how real change begins, with people standing together for what's right." The days following Sarah's broadcast brought transformations that exceeded their highest hopes. Government officials, who had previously cited lack of resources as a reason for inaction, now arrived in Gardner to launch official investigations. The evidence John, Sarah, and Charlie had gathered provided a solid foundation for formal inquiries into the Harrison Export Co.'s activities. Community members who had once feared speaking out now stepped forward with their own testimonies. The local diner became a hub for residents sharing their stories with investigating officials. Mary Anderson, the diner's owner, kept coffee flowing as people lined up to contribute their pieces to the growing puzzle. "It's like watching a dam break," Sarah observed, continuing her coverage of the unfolding events. Her broadcast had evolved into a daily chronicle of the community's transformation. Once the first crack appeared, everything started flowing freely. John's analytical expertise found new purpose in helping officials understand the complex web of evidence they had uncovered. His corporate background proved invaluable in explaining the financial patterns that revealed the true nature of the export company's operations. The Harrison Export Company's facade began crumbling rapidly. Business partners publicly suspended their relationships pending investigation. Local suppliers, freed from fear of retaliation, shared records of suspicious transactions. The company's carefully constructed network of influence dissolved in the face of public scrutiny. Charlie's former colleagues in the Park Service initiated their own internal review. His years of service and reputation lent credibility to the investigation, encouraging others within the system to come forward with information they had previously feared to share. Local youth organizations began organizing wilderness protection programs. The same teenagers who had helped spread their story on social media now led educational initiatives about wildlife conservation. Their enthusiasm inspired other communities to launch similar programs. Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic transformed into a certified wildlife rehabilitation center, with support pouring in from environmental organizations nationwide. Her documented cases became teaching materials for other veterinarians learning to care for injured wildlife. The farmers who had provided safe havens for animals found themselves celebrated as environmental heroes. Their properties became model sites for combining agricultural activities with wildlife protection. Other farming communities began reaching out to learn from their example. Tom Henderson's hardware store displayed a new sign, "Proud supporter of wildlife protection." His careful documentation of suspicious equipment purchases had helped create a template for other businesses to identify and report similar activities. Sarah's journalism earned recognition from major news organizations, but she remained focused on the local story. "The real story isn't about exposing wrongdoing," she explained during one broadcast. "It's about showing how a community can come together to protect what matters." The local tech team's expertise found new applications as they helped develop systems for tracking and protecting wildlife. Their secure communication network became a model for other communities organizing environmental protection efforts. John watched these developments from his cabin porch, marveling at how his decision to leave New York had led to such unexpected outcomes. The wilderness he had sought for peace had given him a purpose far more meaningful than corporate success. Environmental organizations began establishing offices in Gardner, recognizing the town's potential as a model for community-based conservation efforts. The movement they had started was growing beyond their original goals, inspiring similar actions in other communities. Charlie's vision of proper park stewardship started becoming reality as new protocols were implemented throughout the region. His years of experience helped shape policies that balanced conservation with responsible land use. The transformation extended beyond immediate environmental concerns. Local businesses reported increased tourism from people inspired by the community's stand for conservation. The town's identity shifted from a gateway to Yellowstone to a symbol of environmental stewardship. As evening settled over the valley, John sat with Sarah and Charlie reviewing the day's developments. The peaceful wilderness around them seemed more vibrant somehow, as if responding to the community's renewed commitment to protection. "We've started something remarkable," Sarah said, looking out over the landscape they had fought to protect. "This isn't just about stopping one company anymore." The transformation of Gardner into a model of environmental conservation continued to evolve in ways that touched every aspect of community life. The town that had once turned a blind eye to environmental exploitation now stood as a beacon of wildlife protection, drawing visitors and researchers from across the country. Local businesses underwent a remarkable evolution. The Harrison Export Company's former warehouse was repurposed into an environmental education center where school groups learned about wildlife protection and conservation. The irony of this transformation wasn't lost on anyone, especially John, who had witnessed the building's darker purpose firsthand. "This is what real change looks like," Sarah commented during one of her follow-up broadcasts. She had decided to establish a permanent base in Gardner, recognizing that the story of community transformation deserved ongoing coverage. Her reports now focused on the positive changes sweeping through the region. Charlie's expertise found new purpose in training the next generation of environmental stewards. He developed programs that combined his practical knowledge with modern conservation techniques, creating a comprehensive approach to wilderness protection that other communities began to adopt. The local teenagers who had helped expose the truth now led their own initiatives. They created wildlife monitoring programs using their tech skills, developing apps that helped track and protect local animal populations. Their enthusiasm inspired similar youth movements in neighboring communities. John's analytical skills proved invaluable in developing sustainable business models for the town's new conservation-focused economy. His corporate background helped local businesses adapt to eco-friendly practices while maintaining profitability. The transition proved that environmental protection and economic success could go hand in hand. Dr. Chen's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center expanded with support from national organizations. Her facility became a teaching hospital for veterinary students specializing in wildlife care. The knowledge gained from treating injured animals led to improved protection measures throughout the park. The Farmers Alliance strengthened their commitment to wildlife protection, developing new agricultural practices that created safe corridors for animal movement. Their methods became a case study in how traditional farming could coexist with wildlife conservation. Local artists found inspiration in the community's transformation, creating works that celebrated the connection between people and wilderness. The town's galleries filled with paintings and sculptures that told the story of their environmental awakening. Tom Henderson's hardware store evolved into a hub for eco-friendly building supplies and conservation equipment. His business became a model for how traditional retailers could adapt to serve a community's changing values and needs. The secure communication network developed by the local tech team expanded into a region-wide system for coordinating conservation efforts. Their innovation showed how technology could serve environmental protection while maintaining community privacy. Sarah's continued coverage attracted attention from environmental filmmakers and documentarians. They saw in Gardner's story a powerful message about community action and environmental responsibility. The town's transformation began inspiring similar movements across the country. The wilderness around John's cabin seemed more alive than ever, as if responding to the community's protection. Wildlife began returning to areas where they hadn't been seen in years, a living testament to the impact of their efforts. Charlie's network of former Park Service colleagues helped establish new protocols for wildlife protection that spread throughout the national park system. Their experience proved invaluable in creating practical, effective conservation measures. Community meetings, once focused on exposing environmental exploitation, now centered on developing new initiatives for wilderness protection. The town hall became a forum for sharing ideas and planning future conservation projects. As evening settled over Yellowstone, John sat with Sarah and Charlie on his cabin porch, reflecting on how far they had come. The peaceful scene before them represented more than just natural beauty. It symbolized the power of community action and shared purpose. "We've created something lasting," Charlie observed, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "This isn't just about protecting wilderness anymore. It's about showing what's possible when people come together for something bigger than themselves." 1 year after their initial exposure of the Harrison Export Company's activities, Gardner had become unrecognizable from the town it once was. The community's transformation into a center for environmental protection had exceeded even John's most optimistic projections from his days as a market analyst. The former headquarters of Harrison Export Commerce now housed the Yellowstone Wildlife Protection Initiative, a collaborative project between local activists and national conservation organizations. The building's transformation symbolized the community's journey from complicity to leadership in environmental stewardship. Sarah's coverage had evolved into a regular series about community-based conservation efforts. Gardner's story continues to inspire similar movements across the country, she reported. Communities are discovering their power to protect their natural heritage. The local youth who had been instrumental in their social media campaign now ran sophisticated wildlife monitoring programs. Their innovative use of technology for conservation had caught the attention of major environmental organizations, leading to partnerships and funding for new projects. Charlie's expertise found expression in a comprehensive training program for environmental protection. "We're not just teaching people about conservation," he explained to a group of visitors. "We're showing them how to build communities that protect their natural resources." John's analytical skills helped develop a sustainable tourism model that balanced environmental protection with economic growth. Visitors now came to Gardner not just to see Yellowstone, but to learn about community-based conservation efforts. The Farmers Alliance had expanded their wildlife protection initiatives, creating a network of protected corridors throughout the region. Their success proved that agriculture and conservation could work hand in hand, inspiring similar programs in other farming communities. Dr. Chen's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had become a leading facility for research into wildlife protection. Her work with injured animals led to improved understanding of human impacts on wildlife and better methods for protecting vulnerable species. The local businesses that had supported their initial investigation now proudly displayed their commitment to environmental protection. The coffee shop, hardware store, and other establishments had become examples of how traditional businesses could embrace conservation values. The secure communication network developed by the tech team had grown into a regional system for coordinating conservation efforts. Their innovation showed how technology could serve environmental protection while maintaining community privacy. Town meetings now focused on expanding their conservation initiatives. The same community spirit that had helped expose environmental exploitation now drove efforts to create new protection programs and educational opportunities. The wilderness around John's cabin thrived under the community's protection. Wildlife moved freely through the protected areas, and the natural beauty that had first drawn him to Yellowstone seemed more vibrant than ever. Charlie's network of former Park Service colleagues had helped establish new standards for wildlife protection throughout the national park system. Their experience proved invaluable in creating practical, effective conservation measures. As evening approached, John sat with Sarah and Charlie, watching the sunset paint the sky over Yellowstone. The peaceful scene before them represented more than just natural beauty. It symbolized the power of community action and shared purpose. "We've created something that will last," Sarah observed, reviewing notes for her latest report. "This isn't just about one community anymore. It's about showing what's possible when people stand together." The transformation that had begun with John's decision to leave New York had grown into something far greater than he had imagined. The skills he had developed in corporate America had found new purpose in protecting the wilderness he had come to love. Charlie smiled, his weathered face reflecting the satisfaction of seeing his life's work bear fruit. "The best part is knowing that this is just the beginning. Every day more communities are following Gardner's example." 2 years had passed since John Wallace first left his Manhattan office for the wilderness of Yellowstone. As he stood on his cabin porch, watching the morning sun illuminate the mountains, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed. The peaceful sanctuary he had sought had become something far more meaningful, a base for a movement that continued to grow beyond their small community. The story of Gardner's transformation had sparked a nationwide conversation about community-based conservation. Sarah's ongoing coverage documented similar movements springing up in other communities near national parks and protected areas. Her reports now focused on connecting these various initiatives, showing how local actions could create widespread change. The Yellowstone Wildlife Protection Initiative, housed in the former Harrison Export Commerce Building, had become a model for community-based conservation programs. Environmental organizations from across the country sent representatives to learn from their experience, adapting their methods for other communities. John's analytical skills found new purpose in helping other communities develop their own protection programs. The precise attention to detail that had once served corporate interests now helped create sustainable conservation initiatives. His background in market analysis proved invaluable in showing communities how environmental protection could coexist with economic success. Charlie's training programs had expanded beyond Gardner, reaching other communities that bordered wilderness areas. His practical experience, combined with the lessons learned from their success, provided a blueprint for effective environmental protection. The local teenagers who had helped expose the truth had grown into leaders of their own environmental initiatives. Their technology-driven approach to conservation inspired a new generation of environmental activists, showing how modern tools could serve ancient wilderness. Dr. Chen's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had become a renowned facility for research and treatment. The knowledge gained from their work with injured animals led to improved protection measures throughout the national park system. The facility stood as a testament to the community's commitment to wildlife protection. The Farmers Alliance had successfully demonstrated how agriculture and conservation could work together. Their methods for creating wildlife corridors while maintaining productive farms became a model for other agricultural communities near protected areas. One morning, as John walked along a favorite trail with Sarah and Charlie, they encountered a familiar sight. The mother dog they had rescued years ago, now leading a healthy pack through their protected territory. The moment symbolized everything they had achieved. "Look how far we've come," Sarah remarked, watching the animals move freely through their natural habitat. From uncovering exploitation to creating real, lasting protection. Charlie nodded, his experienced eyes taking in the thriving wilderness around them. This is what success looks like, when protection becomes part of a community's identity. John thought about his journey from corporate analyst to environmental advocate. The skills he had developed in New York had found their true purpose here in the wilderness, helping protect something genuinely valuable. The transformation that had begun with one man's search for peace had grown into a movement that continued to inspire and evolve. Gardner stood as proof that when communities united to protect their natural heritage, lasting change was possible. As the sun set over Yellowstone that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, John realized that his story had come full circle. The escape he had sought from his corporate life had led him to a purpose far greater than he could have imagined. "The wilderness called to me for a reason," he reflected, watching the light fade over the mountains. Sometimes you have to trust that inner voice that tells you to take a different path. Dear listeners, we hope John Wallace's journey from corporate success to environmental guardian has touched your hearts. His story reminds us that real change begins with individual courage and grows through community action. To continue experiencing such inspiring narratives of transformation and hope, find our special playlist by clicking the link to your left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's profound transformations. Join us in the comments below to share your thoughts on how one person's courage can spark lasting change. Together, we can inspire more stories of positive transformation in our world.